And now, a passage from A History of Louisiana, from Chapter 40, Aaron Burr. In 1805, a gay little barge came floating down the Mississippi and landed at New Orleans. For years, Indian canoes, light barks of the early pioneers, and loaded flatboats of the Westerners had glided southward with the river's current. But the old river had borne upon its yellow waters nothing like this floating palace. Carpets covered the floors, silken coverlets were on the downy beds, and costly silver and tableware added to the attractiveness of the well-served meals. The owner of the cozy houseboat was Colonel Aaron Burr, who had come to pay a visit to New Orleans. The master of the barge was as elegant as his surroundings. Colonel Burr was about middle height, but he carried himself with so much dignity and grace that he appeared to be taller. His face was very intellectual, and he had piercing dark eyes which could become tender and sweet when he willed them so. He wore black velvet knee breeches, a coat with lace ruffles at the wrist, a shirt with ruffles down the front, black silk stockings, and low shoes with silver buckles. He had the easy and gracious air of a man who had mingled with the best people. And so he had, for he had been an officer in the war in which the Americans threw off the yoke of Great Britain. He had been a member of the United States Senate and Vice President of the United States. There was much talk about war between the United States and Spain, growing out of the dissatisfaction caused by Spain's claiming territory within the United States. Everybody knew that should such a war come, New Orleans would be a very important point for military movements on account of its being so near Texas. A society had been formed in the city for the purpose of finding out what the Spaniards were doing in Texas and Mexico. This society welcomed Burr, for it was supposed that so prominent a man as Colonel Burr had the confidence of his government, and that he had been sent to New Orleans to study its position and learn all that he could concerning the movements of the Spaniards. New Orleans received her distinguished guest with open arms. Balls, dinners, receptions, and theater parties were given in his honor. New Orleans was too polite to ask her visitor why he had come. Burr was not very frank in giving his reasons for visiting New Orleans. He let it be understood, however, that his purpose was to attempt to capture Texas and Mexico for the United States should war break out with Spain. About a year after Burr's visit to New Orleans, rumors spread through the entire United States that some dark, deep plot was being laid to overthrow the government, and that the plotters would assemble in large numbers at New Orleans. Nobody could tell anything positive about the plot, but all were greatly excited over it. General Wilkinson wrote to Governor Claiborne, "You are surrounded by dangers of which you dream not." And it did not add to Claiborne's peace of mind when the general continued, "The storm will probably burst in New Orleans." General Wilkinson wrote also to President Jefferson of a wicked conspiracy which took in the old and the young, and which, he feared, would receive support in New Orleans. From the Atlantic to the Mississippi, the whole country was thrown into a fever of excitement and dread. President Jefferson sent out a proclamation warning the citizens of the United States that a plot had been formed against the government, and commanding them to have nothing to do with it. He ordered all of the officers of the Army and Navy to be watchful, and begged the good people everywhere to help him discover the men who were so disloyal as to enter into the conspiracy. Governor Claiborne felt very uneasy, the more so because he did not trust the Creoles. Near the end of the year 1806, he called a meeting of the merchants and other prominent citizens of New Orleans. He was then able to name the man who was accused of being the leader of the plot against the peace of the country. It was Aaron Burr, who had been in the past year a guest of the city. The governor told those who had gathered at the meeting that Colonel Burr would soon come down the river with 2,000 men, that 4,000 more from among the Westerners were ready to join him, and that it was reported that 1,000 men in New Orleans would support him when he reached the city. He also told his hearers that Burr's scheme was to capture New Orleans, to conquer Texas and Mexico, seize the territory of the United States west of the Allegheny Mountains, and unite all these countries into one mighty empire with himself as the ruler. Governor Claiborne asked the citizens to help him and General Wilkinson to defend the city. The answer was that they would do all in their power. The merchants of the city promised to fit out vessels to meet Burr as he came down the river. Some months later, the Legislative Council met and, in the name of Louisiana, declared loyalty to the United States. While the people throughout the country were keeping up their spirits by making patriotic speeches, yet growing somewhat nervous over the expected bloody conflict, Colonel Burr, with a party of friends, was sailing down the Mississippi for the purpose of settling on lands which Burr owned on the Wachita River in Louisiana. The party stopped at Natchez. Here, Burr was persuaded to go to the capital of Mississippi and answer the charges against him. He was tried and declared innocent. Later, at Richmond, Virginia, he was tried for treason against the United States. Again, he was acquitted. For a long time, nearly everybody believed that Aaron Burr intended to commit treason against his country. Now, a good many think that he intended only to take Texas and Mexico from the Spaniards and make himself ruler over those countries. Only under the pretense of fighting for the United States could he hope to conquer the Spanish possessions. And Spain and the United States did not go to war, so his scheme fell through. How far he intended to carry his plot will never be known. If you enjoy High Americana, please head on over to Patreon, where you can support the channel and audio requests can be made. Thank you.